Hi, I'm Lionel Frey. In nest number 9, we will be constructing a value map and use it as a lens for viewing one of the most important problems facing the world today, the potential for disaster to us humans that will come about from climate change unless we do something about it. This lens will help us see what must be done and who must do it. But before we construct this value map, we will use another kind of lens to help us understand two things. First, why and how the Earth's climate is in the process of changing. And second, what effects this change is having that results in a threat to the world's economics and even to human life on Earth as we know it. This other kind of lens is called a causal map. As you will see, it is a way of understanding how different processes affect each other. And in this case, it will show how they result in a change in climate that nobody wants. So let's first look at the climate change dynamics. As I'm sure you've heard, the activities of us humans in the past century or more that involve burning fossil fuels like coal and oil have been sending so-called greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The amount of carbon dioxide in the air, the major one, has been rising dramatically in recent years and is now more than it has been for hundreds of thousands of years. And you can see how the causal map works. One activity causes another, as shown by the dashed green arrow. So the gases from human activities, as the increasing carbon dioxide in the air absorbs more of the sun's radiation, cause an increase in global temperatures. The total amount of such greenhouse gases has recently been estimated to be about 51 billion metric tons, which is a lot, even when spread out over the whole Earth. So here's a pie chart that shows you where it is all coming from. I'll give you a moment to look at it. Among other things, as you can see, more than half of it comes from manufacturing and the generation of electricity. One of the effects of this rise in temperature is that large amounts of permafrost, which is essentially ground that normally stays frozen throughout the year, is gradually thawing. Such large amounts are in Alaska, Canada, Russia, and other places. And when permafrost thaws, it releases carbon dioxide and methane that has been trapped there for thousands of years. And this additional release of gases in turn causes additional temperature rise. Notice that we now have a circular causal pattern. This is called a cycle by scientists, and more specifically, a positive feedback cycle or loop. And once it gets going, it's not easily stopped. This one is called the permafrost cycle. Another effect of increasing air temperature is that it causes additional melting of snow and ice, which reduces the area covered by it and exposes more ground. This newly exposed ground absorbs rather than reflects the sun's rays back into space, causing the ground to further warm, and that warmth then warms the air. The scientists call this the albedo effect. And as you can see, this diminished reflection creates another positive feedback loop pattern called an albedo cycle. Yet another such pattern occurs when the warmer air warms the ocean, causing more evaporation of water vapor, which causes more absorption of energy from the sun, and we have the ocean warming cycle. And finally, the higher temperature creates more droughts, which, among other things, dries out forests, which increases the severity of forest fires like the ones we have recently been having in California, and reduces the total amount of forest coverage of the Earth. This releases more greenhouse gases, and so we have a fourth cycle. But there are some additional important effects of the warming atmosphere. The melting of ice and snow disturbs the pattern of the jet stream, which affects weather patterns, especially in the northern hemisphere. An example is last winter's freeze that extended much further south than normal in the United States to Texas and surrounding states and lasted much longer than normal. And in other parts of the Earth, the jet stream dislocation, combined with ocean warming, has increased the pattern and intensity of hurricanes and typhoons in the oceans. This combination can also create other forms of extreme weather like droughts and at different times, major floods. Another important effect is that the warming ocean, combined with the melting of ice and snow, particularly in Greenland and Antarctica, is causing the ocean levels to rise throughout the Earth. A final effect we will note is that the increased air temperature has caused a shift in the location of the temperate zones on the Earth. In the northern hemisphere, the zone has moved northward, and in the southern hemisphere, it has moved southward, and the middle has gotten hotter. So the causal map of climate dynamics has shown us the pattern of movement and change, including the existence of 4 positive feedback loops or cycles that intensify the pattern and will be slow to stop and difficult to reverse. So now in part 2 of this nest, we're going to extend the causal map in a second dimension by looking at the major effects this climate change has on us humans. First, it is easy to understand that extreme weather, the hurricanes, floods, droughts, and even unexpected extended freezes, creates major losses to the economies where and when they occur. So let's show this. Then we have sea level rise, which will do major damage to coastline installations around the world, such as harbors or airfields, roads and train tracks, and dwellings. All of these, of course, will be very costly to repair or to move. And third, and perhaps less obvious, is the effect of the temperate climate shifts toward the poles. For the farms and forests that are located in the zones nearer the equator, the increased temperatures and accompanying droughts will greatly reduce their productivity. But for countries presently in the far northern and southern limits of the temperate zones, their productivity will increase because their growing seasons will become longer and more land will be available for farming. Think, for example, of southern parts of Russia and Canada. However, present estimates are that the losses will greatly exceed the gains, so the net effect will still result in overall reduced productivity. Another effect of significance to the peoples of the world is that the temperature climate shifts both north and south will force migrations of people who are presently closer to the equator, because the increased temperatures and droughts make their lands much less productive and they are threatened with starvations. We can see elements of this effect today. Think, for example, of the refugees leaving Syria and adjacent countries and trying to move north to Europe, or those in Central America trying to get into the United States. At a minimum, such movements cause political disruptions, and if they become sufficiently intense, can lead to wars. Now, a third kind of major impact of climate change is on the health of humans, both physical and mental. To begin with, high temperatures in themselves and in their long durations can weaken people or even kill them. So can extreme weather and droughts. And the combination of various human activities and forest fires will generate fine particulates that affect our ability to breathe. Dr. Barry Levy, who is at Tufts University, recently co-authored a book on this subject. His summary of the potential ill effects of climate change on us is summarized on this slide. So as you can see, by using a causal map, we have developed a perspective that on one page summarizes the dimensions of climate change and explains its major effects on humans. Now we come to the difficult part of this nest. Given the nature and effects of climate change, what must we do to slow it down, stop it, and possibly reverse it? As the causal map shows, the driver of climate change is the greenhouse gases that we are pumping into the atmosphere. So the key to tackling this problem is to greatly reduce the amount of such pumping and to find ways of absorbing the amount that's left. A target that was set by many countries following the Paris conference back in 2015 is to stop it altogether by 2050. A so-called net zero. They hope this is achievable and not too late to avoid a major disaster. But what has to be done to achieve this? And who will do it? In order to get an answer to this tough question, we will develop a value map that will help us see the major elements of the whole picture and who has to do what. We begin by drawing a very simple business model that shows that providers of all kinds of products, services, and energy create values that are delivered to all humans on Earth. That's the blue arrow value flow. The humans recognize these values and pay for them. That's the green arrow. And the value flowing, of course, is funds. But while the providers are creating those values, as we have shown in part 1 of this video, they also generated greenhouse gases in the global atmosphere, a negative value flow, as shown by the red arrow. And as we showed in part 2, the effect of these gases in the atmosphere is shown in the model as a negative value flow, another red arrow. It is one that affects all humans in the form of losses in economics, health, and political disruptions. So this is the one we've got to cut way back on. And the way to do it, of course, is to cut back on greenhouse gases. How can we do this? By mitigating our gas-generating processes in whatever ways we know how, thus creating a positive value flow to the atmosphere. For example, we can shift the generation of electricity from coal plants to gas plants, or going further to more wind and solar generators. And we can practice so-called regenerative agriculture that creates less carbon dioxide and stores more of it in the soil. And we can stop the destruction of forests and plant millions of trees. And we can recycle many plastic products and containers. And we can make and use more electric cars and trucks. There are lots of ways to reduce the generation of carbon gases with mitigations. But most estimates of the magnitude of such mitigations are that even taken together and expanded, they are not enough. We need more. We need to develop innovations, that is, new methods and processes, many of which will be enabled by technologies that have yet to be developed. Here's a list of such potential innovations. If successful in both technology and scale demand, They could affect many different industries and make major contributions to meeting our climate change goal. Take a moment and go down the list. As you can see, in most cases, the spark plug for these new innovations is new technologies, some of which, like fusion power, for example, are far out in time and high risk. Where can such technologies originate? Well, often from new knowledge that comes from the fruits of basic research in academia. So we show this stage in our ValueMap. Of course, the development of innovations requires funding. Much of it, especially in democratic countries, comes from the growing segment of the private sector that is informed about the need to fight climate change and is committed to it. This segment includes companies, financial institutions, and even philanthropists. They fund both basic and early-stage technologies, as well as the development of innovations in their later stages. So we show these funding value flows in our ValueMap. But in addition to funding directly, this private sector segment also has another kind of strong influence on providers. For example, in recent years, more investment funds, who are major corporate stockholders, are demanding not only profitable performance from their companies, but also so-called ESG performance, where ESG stands for environment, social, and governance, with increasingly heavy emphasis on the E for environment. They also demand measurements of such performance where possible, so as to achieve so-called double bottom lines. We show this as an influential value flow with the segmented blue arrow. Another very important and often larger source of funding for innovation development in both channels are governments. These fundings are particularly large in countries like the United States and the European Union, and even larger these days in China. But in addition to funding, governments also have a very strong influence encouraging innovation developments by forming laws and regulations. Another way is by taxation of greenhouse gas generation or duties on imports that relate to greenhouse gas generating products. For example, the United States has put limits on future auto gas consumption, and California has even implemented a cap-and-trade program. Such policies have caused General Motors recently to declare that it will stop producing gas and diesel cars by 2035. And the entire global auto industry is now making heavy investments in the design and development of electric vehicles. So we show this influential value flow as well. But it's not only governments and the private sector that can have a strong influence on the value providers. We humans, as consumers, can in many cases have an even stronger influence by selectively buying more products that are known to be working against climate change and for sustainability. As we demonstrated in nest number 7, Unilever, a company that designates its sustainable living brands, reported 2 years ago that sales of those products grew 69% faster than their other ones. Somebody was listening. As we also showed in nest number 7, in order to obtain this kind of a response from consumers, company providers must pursue purpose management. They must establish sustainability or net zero goals and engage all their stakeholders in contributing to them. These need to include employees, suppliers, and even downstream to the disposers and recyclers of their products and containers. Of course, to get the payoff, companies that have chosen to pursue this path have to measure their progress toward net zero. And one more thing, they have to communicate their commitment and progress to consumers. They need to do this by branding and, yes, advertising, using all forms of media, including social, that will reach their market segments, especially the younger ones who have the most to gain from stopping climate change. The communication of these values will allow them to have a positive influence on the behavior of their customers. So we show that flow on the value map. By the way, some approaches to this activity can be quite creative. I recently learned of a rapidly growing company in an industry you would not think of having much potential to contribute to solving the climate change problem: financial services. Among other things, this company offers its customers various ways of doing good in their language that they trumpet. One of these is very popular, especially among the younger ones. If these customers agree to round up their dollar charges when they occur, the company will plant a tree to extend a forest. So far, they have planted more than 10 million trees in this way. There is another way we humans can help. At least in democratic countries, we can have a strong influence on government funding and regulations. How? By voting for candidates that strongly support climate change innovations. So we show this flow as well. Lastly, it is clear that in order to meet our climate change goal of net zero by 2050, all the countries of the world must work together towards it, because we live on one planet and share the same atmosphere. We'll show this by the dotted oval that surrounds this whole process. Following the 2015 Paris Climate Change Conference, many issues among the countries remain, such as the nature and extent of enforcement, the equity between rich countries who generated most of the current atmospheric carbon and poor countries, and the respective degree of impact climate change will have on different countries. But throughout the world, there appears to be increasing awareness of the importance of climate change and the needed cooperation and urgency in dealing with it. So we may be getting a handle on preventing the climate change disaster. I hope the time we've spent together has given you a better appreciation of why climate change is coming, what it will do to us humans, and what we must do to slow it down and stop it so as to prevent a catastrophe. The value map that was developed shows that the we in what we must do includes you. Whether in any country you live, you are a farmer, an employee of a company, or perhaps one of its leaders, a scientist or an engineer working to develop new carbon technology, a key government official, a teacher, a health worker, a banker, a philanthropist, an investor, and, as we all are, a buyer of consumer goods and services, as well as a disposer of spent goods. In any role you have in life, your actions can help stave off climate change. And if you do so, all the other life forms on this planet will appreciate it too. I also hope that you found watching the process of constructing causal maps and the value map to enhance your understanding. Their use in business planning is described in the other nests to be found in this website. We welcome your commentary and will be pleased to respond to any questions you may have.